Hello, my name is Lily, and today I attended a service at the New Testament Church of God Community Church in Brixton, marking the first anniversary of the murder of George Floyd in the United States. The service was also an opportunity to explore issues of racial justice in this country, and after the service I interviewed a number of attendees to ask them about the service and their thoughts on racial justice. And here's some footage. Okay, well, thank you very much for stopping by. We've just attended the George Floyd commemorative service, and you said that you're kindly going to share some thoughts and opinions for us. So may I first of all take your name?
Shaniqua, and I go to St. Martin's.
Okay, that's great. So, as I said, we've attended the George Floyd commemorative service. Why was it important to have a service like this?
I believe it was important to have this service for people to open their eyes and to know what's actually going on in the world, and to make sure we go forward and not push back the progress that we've already done in the world, basically.
Okay, that's great. So, did you do anything yourself? How did you respond to the death of George Floyd?
When I watched the video, it was kind of hard for me, and I got family in America as well, and I kind of worry about their safety as well. In English, we actually did something for Black History Month, but I believe we should do it for all the time, not just in Black History or in October in Black History Month.
Yeah. So, really, you think it's about learning, it's about education.
Yeah.
So it's something that we need to keep doing.
Mm.
So, how will you help others to keep that on the agenda, keep racial justice on the agenda?
I believe that we should if you see the George Floyd video or videos in general, seeing of people not being equal in terms of racial things, I believe we should share it and show it to our moms, dads, family members, anything like that. Just share it basically.
Okay. Do you discuss the topic amongst your friends, school friends, others?
Most of the times, yeah, we talk about some things, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really great, and I think that as a young person, you're good. You're doing a really good thing, and you are going to make a real change for the world, and you're going to make it better for us. Thank you. Hello. Thank you for stopping by to have a quick chat. You've just attended the service to commemorate the life of George Floyd. May I take your name first of all?
Yeah, I'm Adele, and I go to Archbishop Tennyson's.
Okay, and why was it important for them to actually have a service like this today to commemorate George Floyd?
I think it's important that we take time out to remember what happened in the time of George Floyd's death.
Okay, and how did you respond to the death of George Floyd?
I went on a peaceful protest in Vauxhall. Yeah.
Okay. And were there many people there?
Yeah, there was a lot.
Okay. And did you do other things as well? Did you chat with your friends?
Yeah, in school I entered a competition, and I expressed my feelings about what I felt about the death of George Floyd.
Okay, that's great. And what do you think that we should do to ensure that the issue of racial justice remains on the agenda, that people talk about it?
I think that in schools, students should be more aware of what's happening. I think that we should have assemblies, and it should be more of a main subject on the news.
Thank you. So you think that education is key?
Yeah.
That we should share more information with each other?
Yeah.
And keep talking about the subject?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Adele. Thank you for stopping by. And how did you respond to the death of George?
During lockdown for our school, I made posters about Black Lives Matter and expressing my feelings towards it as well.
Okay. Did you chat with your friends about the subject?
Yeah, and teachers.
How did you all feel?
We all felt the same way, and it's been how it should be stopped more, and more punishments towards the racial actions happening as well.
Okay. So what more do you think we should do to actually ensure that racial justice is discussed more in church and society?
You can talk about how other people can get involved in the protests and show other people that were really taking it seriously, and it should be stopped more and more.
Hello, thank you very much for stopping by. May I ask your name, please?
I'm Robin from St. Martin's in the Field.
And so you've just attended a commemorative service to George Floyd. Why was it important to have a service like this?
To tell people and keep them remembering that all this happens in the world, not just happened to George Floyd, and it still happens to people now.
Okay, so it's something that's happening in America, but it's also happening here in the UK as well. Okay, and how did you respond to the death of George Floyd? Maybe as an individual, maybe as a school group also?
I was shocked that people still act this way and they still disrespect people just because of the pigment of their skin.
Did you do anything with school? Did you discuss it at school? Or with friends, maybe?
Yeah, we wrote stuff in English, like a speech about how we feel and how we feel in our skin. And I joined a march in Brockwell Park.
Okay, so you joined the march as well. Okay, and how was it? What was it like being on a march with others?
It was interesting to hear people's views on the topic and racism.
That's very proactive. So, how do you think that we will keep the issue of racial justice on the agenda in the future? What do you think?
Assemblies, museums, just to keep people, to remind people of what happens and how we should stop it and prevent it, and how people should adapt to our environment and how people are.
Okay, that's really helpful. Well, I mean, thank you ever so much for stopping by and sharing your thoughts. It's very enlightening, and it's really good to see young people who are making a change and helping to change the world. So thank you. Hello, thank you very much for stopping by. May I ask your name first of all, please?
So I'm Marta, and I go to St. Martin's.
Okay, thank you. And so we've just attended the George Floyd service. Can I take your name again?
My name's Marta, and I go to St. Martin's.
Okay, thank you very much for stopping by. And we've just attended the service to commemorate the life of George Floyd. Why was it important to have a service like this?
I mean, I really think it's important because it's just good to recognise these things so that we can move forwards when it comes to racism and basically all the other problems just happening around the world.
So, when you heard the death of George Floyd, how did you respond? Did you do something individually, maybe as a school group, as a collective? How did you respond?
I mean, we got letters sent home talking about it. I mean, we also had a discussion in schools. We had lessons, but yeah.
Okay, so there's lots of different things that you did.
Yeah.
So you were able to actually discuss it in a very rounded way.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So you were able to express how you felt and your thoughts. That's great. And how do you think that we should ensure that we keep racial justice on the agenda? What should we do? What potentially could we do?
I mean, we have come very far in like the past century or so when it comes to racism, but there's still so much more to go till we reach full equality. So I think organisations like Black Lives Matter, marches, those kind of things will what we need to get there.
I'm Gabriel. I'm a university student who studies politics and international relations, and I'm also a young author.
Okay, great. That's really interesting.
Thank you.
So you were at the service today, and this was a service to commemorate the life of George Floyd. Why was it important to have a service like this?
Well, I think there's two aspects in my opinion, and that's that first of all, death is something that we commemorate, is something that we mourn, especially death at the hands of injustice is something that we have to remember so that we don't continue to make the same mistakes. But also I think the theme of it being a service is really important because the church and like the Christian church has a duty against injustice, so it's right that we embody that through service.
So you personally, how did you respond to the death of George Floyd?
I think it's something that at first, like, I was very traumatized, I was very upset by. I feel like I still hold that same sadness within me even now. But I also thought it was an opportunity for cultural change, for education. I feel like both of those themes like definitely played a big part in my reaction towards it. So I still feel like I'm learning a lot about black history, about black identity, etc.
So what more should be done to ensure that the issue of racial justice remains on the agenda and within church and society in general?
I feel like black people's opinion should be taken more seriously than it has been already. So we get that black people are in places they're succeeding, but are they comfortable within those places? Are they receiving the right treatment? So whenever we try to combat institutional change, make sure that you're looking to see if black people feel as if they're being listened to, treated correctly, whether that be in healthcare, education, or whichever environment. We need to make sure that they're considered properly.
That's really interesting. And I thought that what you had to share in the service was really interesting, and it felt like it came from the heart. And you mentioned that you're also an author. Just give us a quick taste of it that you've just written. Is it a novel that you've written?
A novel. Yeah, so my book, The Escape, A Tale of Change and Revolution, is about a young man who comes from a troubled environment himself, but goes on to become a change maker in society and escapes his life of trouble to become a better person through mentorship. It speaks about the benefit of mentorship for a lot of the problems within the black community and just working class communities, and it also speaks about themes of revolution and societal change.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I will be looking for it at the bookshop. Thank you ever so much, Gabriel, for stopping by. Thank you again. Can I first of all ask your name, please?
My name is Bevan Powell. I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Advisor for the Methodist Church in Britain.
Okay, thank you very much. And we've just attended the service marking the death of George Floyd. First of all, I'd just like to ask you, what would you hope people listening to BBC local radio will take away from the service to commemorate George Floyd?
I hope they take away the fact that there is hope, but that hope is in our activism. That hope is in our prayer for social justice. It's a prayer to challenge injustice. So it's a call to action.
Okay. So did you, on hearing of the death of George Floyd, did you do something personal or did you do something as a collective? How did you mark that death? Or what was your reaction, your response to the death?
Unfortunately, the death of George Floyd wasn't really a surprise to me because African Americans are killed regularly by the hands of police officers in the United States. However, what was different this time was the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic and it was filmed and it was beamed into our homes, so there was no escaping the horror of his death. So the fact that it was beamed into our homes, I think it acted as a catalyst and again a call to action to challenge, racial injustice, and it was a call to challenge globally.
Why was it important to actually have a service commemorating George Floyd's life?
Because I think his death has acted as a catalyst for change, or the possibility of change. It's a year on. And we've heard a lot of words in terms of change, but we now need to see the action. We now need to see institutions, churches, society in general, what will be the response, what will be the permanent change.
So how do we keep the issue of racial justice on the agenda? And how do you think that we as a group, as individuals, as collectives, what do we do? What do you suggest, or what do you think the possibilities are?
Racial justice is a societal issue. Racism is a societal issue. And so the call really is upon the individual, but also upon the context that you find yourself. If you are within the church, we call for your prayer, but also your action. In the workplace, there's injustice within the workplace in terms of bullying or not having the opportunities to progress. So it's challenging all of those issues, really. We've seen through the pandemic huge inequalities in terms of health for Black and Asian and minority ethnic people. And again, it's to challenge all of that, challenge the inequalities in education, challenge the inequalities in employment, challenge the inequalities in housing.
Well, thank you very much. It's been very enlightening, and I think you've given us indeed a call for action. and we have something in mind, and we have thoughts and opinions that we can actually go and discuss with others and be motivated to do something. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so hello, thank you for stopping by. May I take your name?
Phoebe.
Okay, Phoebe, I just wondered, you've just attended the commemorative service to George Floyd. Why was it important to have a service to George Floyd?
I think it's important to have a service because we must never forget what happened to him and the catalyst that happened because of his murder. So I think it's important to remember him.
That's fine. And how did you respond to the death of George Floyd? Did you do something maybe as an individual? Did you have a collective response, maybe with school? So
I personally was hurt, I was scared and I was traumatised. I first talked about it with my friends, helped, and they asked my point of view, and just to share different opinions and talking about racial injustice as a whole was important and bringing light to the issue.
okay. And how do you think we should try and keep racial justice on the kind of agenda, keeping it at the forefront of our mind? How would we do this? How do you think we could do this?
I think by encouraging discussions again and again and again, talking about it in media and the news, so it's always in our heads, always in our minds, and we see it everywhere and we are reminded of it no matter where we go.
Okay. Well, thank you ever so much for stopping by. And it was great speaking with you. Thank you. Can I start by taking your name, please?
Yes, so I'm Shamara Fletcher and I'm the Principal Officer for Pentecostal, Charismatic and Multicultural Relations at Churches Together in England.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for stopping by.
Thank you.
And we've just attended the service to commemorate George Floyd and his life. And why was it important to have a service to George Floyd?
It was very important to have a service for George Floyd because the whole globe witnessed his death, and I think as the church to join with the rest of civil society in remembering him was very important, not just for the church and our congregants, especially some of our younger members who are all about justice, but also for the wider society, for them to see that we do take this issue seriously. So it was a brilliant event and it was great to be here.
Okay, thank you very much for this. On a personal note, how did you respond to the death of George Floyd? Did it impact you in any particular way? Did you do something, maybe as an individual or maybe as a collective or church? Or how did you respond?
To be honest with you, I was in complete and utter shock to see how he died. And I think it was very triggering and quite traumatic to watch a man die the way that he did. In terms of my personal response, I did go on the marches. I did also question, God, what's going on here? You know, I read in your scripture, in your word, we sing songs about you being a God of justice. So what does it look like for this actually to be enacted in real life and in society? So for me personally, I do a lot of work with homelessness, a lot of campaigning, speaking to government, local community. And I said, actually, if I'm about justice, I need to be about all justice. And I said, I need to pay particular focus to this issue as well.
Can we actually do to ensure that racial justice remains on the agenda in church and wider society?
Yes. I think we have to make sure we don't just see it as an agenda item, as another thing that we get through in our order of business. We need to see this through all areas of ministry, pastoral, discipleship, mission, to make sure that we've got a fair and equitable society. I think it's our responsibility. It's not just an option or a choice. It's a mandate because God is a God of justice. So in answering your question, I think let's not make it an agenda item. Let's make it part of our culture, our ethos, to ensure that we have a fair and equitable society and church.
Thank you very much. And it was very moving, the poem that you shared today. And it was very touching. And I think that's something that I will take away from today's service. So thank you very much for sharing.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Noah.
No, you were part of the service today. It was a service to commemorate the life of George Floyd. Why was it important to have such a service?
We have to acknowledge his death, more importantly his murder by law enforcement. I see him as a sort of a martyr in a way that he can be like a catalyst for talking about the injustice in not just American society, but overall in all societies.
So how did you respond to the death of George Floyd? Did you do something as an individual, a collective, like at school?
Personally, as I talked about it with friends. I shared around infographics. I made people acknowledge the other types of law enforcement killings, such as Sandra Bland and Fernando Castillo, and such as those, to make people more informative about what the police are doing is wrong.
Okay. And in your opinion, how do we go about keeping racial justice as an issue on the agenda? How do we kind of keep it at the forefront of people's mind?
It needs to be spoken about a lot, not just when these issues occur, like someone dies, but just regularly. It needs to be seen as a world issue rather than just a black issue, so that everyone is included to know that this needs to be a change. It's a systemic problem.
Archbishop and girls, thank you very much for stopping by for us to just share some of your thoughts and opinions. We've just participated in the commemorative service to George Floyd, and I'd just like to ask you, why do you think it was important to have a service to commemorate George Floyd?
About a year ago, the murder of George Floyd, I think, changed the perspective of the world. It was a good time for change, realization, but I think what it also did was exposed a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, and that could not have just been ignored. That had to be addressed. It had to be, I think, looked deeper into to see what the historic cause was and where we could go from there. So I think marking a day like this is, of course, it's about the Afro-Caribbean community, it's about the community of color, but it's about everyone who had that pain exposed and what moving on from that point would have meant to them.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. And how did you respond to the death of George Floyd as such? Did you do something maybe collectively? Did you feel that there was you had like a personal kind of like compulsion to do something? How did you respond?
My response was to make sure that every voice that needed to be heard was heard, to provide platforms, to provide space, to provide opportunities. At the time, I was serving as one of the presidents of Churches Together in England. And along with Pastor Agnew and my fellow presidents, we made sure that we were able to listen to voices. We had online calls with young people, with church leaders, with community leaders, with people who were personally and directly impacted. And I think hearing voices rather than hearing about experiences was incredibly important.
Okay, that sounds really moving. And do you think that, is there a particular formula that you feel that what should we do to actually ensure that racial justice remains on the agenda, so that it's not something that was last year or even just a commemorative service, but what do we do to actually affect change?
Whether we're speaking about racial justice, social justice, or any kind of justice, the more we deal with it externally as if it's about someone else or some other group, it becomes external to us and it becomes ineffective. We have token gestures, but it doesn't become about us. The minute we realize that justice is about all of us, so the justice of my brother and my sister is both a justice for me, but it's also an indication of who I am. It's about the justice that he or she has or enjoys is one that I will enjoy, but also if I can sit idly by and see that injustice and not speak, then it makes me also responsible. So I do think it's important for us in moving forward to realize this is about us, not about anybody else. It's about us sharing in the image and likeness of God, in the sanctity of life, in that presence that brings us all together, but also that we're all also responsible for justice being available to everyone equally.
Thank you very much for sharing with us, and your bidding prayers also I felt were very touching. And thank you again for stopping by. And we look forward to speaking to you on another occasion.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Bishop Paul, thank you very much for stopping by. And we're asking you to kind of share some thoughts and opinions on the... Let's start. Bishop Paul, thank you very much for stopping by. We've just attended the service, that commemorative service to mark the life of George Floyd. How did this impact you as such? What did you think about the death of George Floyd?
Well, I was just as shocked as everyone else, by what I saw, what I heard. But I suppose the main thing that comes to mind, it's a phrase I've often heard used, is wake-up call. Because I'd sort of thought that, I'd worked for many years in a parish where half the population, or more than half, were from West Africa. So, and everyone got on very well, in the parish. And I'd sort of more or less taken it for granted that there weren't any particular issues. And then, obviously, George Floyd's murder took place in the United States, but all the same, it did make me think very much, well, am I taking too much for granted? Is there injustice that I haven't really thought about? Are there things that may be just out of thoughtlessness? And especially with the COVID pandemic, and realising that people from minority ethnic backgrounds been so much more badly affected and suffered so much more, and whatever the reasons might be, it's the just being aware of that and thinking, well, that's not due to some sort of oppression or anything, but obviously it happened for a reason.
Yes.
And we need to find out what's going on and do something about it. So in other words, it sort of woke me up to the fact that actually we can't just be passive. We've got to actually sort of actively try and seek justice, as it said in the service.
Yes. So you've mentioned the service. So why was it important for us to have a service like this today?
I suppose two things really. Obviously it reminds us, it keeps the issues before our minds, the issue of racial justice, and also of course in the Roman Catholic tradition very much praying for those who've died, but also their families, so holding them in our thoughts and our prayers, but also that it's just a reminder to us, we need reminding, that we need to take this whole issue forward and to continue to, I suppose as we would say, examine our conscience and to ask difficult questions, and not just sort of assume that everything's okay. And I suppose also, I live in Sutton and I do quite a lot of work with churches nearby in Croydon, and just listening to some of my black friends reflecting on the whole experience, and their feelings and things that show up for them that don't show up for me, and so the importance of listening, that sort of struck me very powerfully.
So in terms of the issue, as you've mentioned, of racial justice, how do we ensure that we keep that on the agenda so that it's not just something that happened last year that we think about this year and maybe next year we've kind of like forgotten? What do we do to try and ensure that we keep it on the agenda, thinking about church, thinking about society in general?
Well, I suppose there's two things that come to mind. Obviously, as a bishop, I'm one of the trustees of the diocese, so we have to make sure that we ask ourselves those sorts of questions about what progress are we making, what signs can we show, just as we, at every trustees meeting, we look at the risk register, all the the usual admin sort of stuff, but that we have also remind ourselves, or ask ourselves, well, are we actually making any progress? As that's one thing. I suppose the other thing is making more use of Racial Justice Sunday, which obviously that's then something that involves all the people and the priests as well. And I suppose sometimes we have so many, we have a Sunday for this, we have a Sunday for that, and over the years we can get a bit immune to these things. So I suppose it's just up to us to keep using these materials that are provided by the CTBI and other bodies, so that keep asking ourselves those questions. And it's not necessarily just black and white either. I suppose it's also, we've got many different communities, and we can so easily make assumptions about assumptions we make about young people. Or about the elderly, and there's a sort of those sort of. I suppose it's just that broad justice agenda, really.
I do think it's key what you've said about using Sundays like Racial Justice Sunday, and because obviously it's been going for many years, and the idea of being able to use that to educate, because that has actually come up in many of the kind of discussions that we've had about education. Young people have spoken earlier on about education, their desire for it not to be just a one-day event or just thinking about Black History Month, but something that's spoken of in their assemblies on a more regular basis.
Schools are very good at that, really, and young people have got a habit of asking awkward questions, which is really very useful at times. It sort of helps to stop people like me from becoming too complacent.
Well, thank you very much for sharing.
You're very welcome.
Hi, my name is Mark Stewart, and until recently I was head of England for Christian Aid. I'm now studying at Durham University, looking at leadership and ecclesiology.
Okay, so can I ask you, what do you hope people listening to BBC Local Radio will take away from our service to commemorate George Floyd?
I think justice is so important for the functioning of our world, for the exercising of our faith. And therefore, if people could be encouraged both to do justice, but also to live out their faith for a God who commands and demands that we live out justice, that would be wonderful.
So why was it important to have a service to commemorate George Floyd?
I think our world was traumatized when they saw what injustice looked like close up. At a time when we were reflecting about life and what was happening as a result of the COVID pandemic, we were sensitized to look at how our world operates, what is important and what is not so important. And we know that justice is important, and justice is important, and we must continue to actually guide, help and support justice through to victory.
Thank you. So you really kept the service going today. You were like one of the strong foundations, or one of the strong pillars. So I'd also like to ask you, how did you respond to the death of George Floyd? Did you do something as an individual? Did you have a collective response? What was your response to the death?
I shed quite a few tears at the death of George Floyd, but I've also made a lot of resolutions too. I've made a resolution not to be silent. I've made a resolution not to manage not emotions, but manage the way I speak about issues. I've determined myself not to be afraid to offend, and to recognize that the cries of people and the experiences of colleagues, I've seen it at work, I've seen it in society, that people are unjustly treated, that my life will be one that is committed to justice and reconciliation, something I've done all my life. So the first thing I think we need to recognize is that justice trumps everything else. There are aspects of justice, including race, including gender, including economic and climate, but unless we understand that justice is something that humanity needs for its own preservation and for us to live in harmony together as a collective, then we cannot think about racial justice. The second thing that is most important is that we're all created in the image and likeness of God. We are of equal worth and equal value. And unless we institute that, in the way we make decisions, in the way we dispense resources, we will always have injustice, and it's important that we constantly keep that to the fore and fight for it.
Okay. Well, thank you ever so much for stopping by and sharing those thoughts and opinions. We have a lot of food for thought and a lot to motivate us to keep working towards equality and ridding the world of racial injustice.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.